The way to win a Super Bowl used to be consistent drafting, strategic free agent signing, and a stout defense led by football coaches who preached discipline and hard-nosed football. You had a homegrown quarterback that you drafted and developed into a star. Not all of that is gone, but the game is changing. You either have Patrick Mahomes, or you trade your future to bring in a hired gun, a mercenary quarterback. This all started with Tom Brady leaving the Patriots. His career to this point was already first ballot Hall of Fame with more Super Bowl wins and MVPs than any other NFL player in history. There had been a constant question in national media at this point, was it Brady or Belichick that was the primary reason for the championships? Brady had missed very little time in his long career thus far, but when he did miss, the Patriots were still winning with quarterbacks like Matt Castle and Jimmy Garoppolo. Tom, being the competitor he is, wanted to prove he could do it without Belichick, and Belichick, being the great coach he is, said he understood that Tampa had a better situation for Brady, but never wanted him to leave. Tampa, while they did have a better situation to drop in a Hall of Fame quarterback, had not been experiencing winning at a high level. The Bucs only had one winning season prior to Brady arriving since 2011. Jameis Winston had been the quarterback for the past few seasons, and while he had thrown 33 touchdowns the year prior to Brady coming in, he had also thrown an insane 30 interceptions, the most thrown in the last 40 years. So they needed an upgrade. There were several teams trying to court Brady in his free agency. The Raiders, Dolphins, Chargers, 49ers, and even the Cowboys were all rumored to be in the hunt. But at the end of the day, he chose Tampa as his next destination. They had existing offensive weapons in Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, but before the season started, Tom Brady had a conversation with an old friend and brought Gronk out of retirement. The Bucs happily sent a 4th-round pick over to New England for the right to sign him, and they were off. They had a good start to the season, and after a win against the Raiders to get them to 5-2, they decided they needed just a little more firepower, so Antonio Brown was brought in, apparently at the request of Tom Brady. He wanted one more elite weapon to throw the ball to, and it worked immediately, as Brown got a large percentage of the targets and looked like his old Steelers self. The team breezed through the rest of the season and would go on to win the Super Bowl over the Chiefs in convincing fashion. It all was worth it, and to be fair, they didn't have to give up anything to get Tom other than some money, unlike the Rams when they wanted to bring in Matthew Stafford. He'd been a top quarterback in the league for several years in Detroit, but never had the team around him to turn it into a playoff run. He had Calvin Johnson to help him for a period of time, and they were the most unstoppable duo in the league, but the defense couldn't stop a nosebleed, and Johnson decided to retire early at the age of 30. During their time together, they set the single-season receiving records at 1,964 yards. Ironically, the second most receiving yards in a single season is by Cooper Kupp in 2021 with Matthew Stafford, and even that took 17 games to accomplish. During his tenure with the Lions, they made the playoffs just 3 times despite Stafford being a top 10 quarterback. He was always loyal to the fan base and the team, but the front office knew that they were reaching a crossroads. They either needed to figure out a way to win games immediately, or it was time to hit the reset button and truly rebuild. Meanwhile, the Los Angeles Rams had made it all the way to the Super Bowl and made other playoff appearances on the back of a top-rated defense, Todd Gurley's running, and Sean McVay's cutting-edge style of play calling. They had Jared Goff, who was a solid starter and a middle-of-the-road caliber quarterback who knew the offense inside and out, but they felt they were a star passer away from being able to get over the hump. So the stage was set and phone calls were made. They got their guy. The Rams essentially mortgaged their future, giving up Jared Goff, who was not just a throwaway trade piece, plus 2 first-round picks and a 3rd. They went all in on the 2021 season, and it worked. Stafford came in on fire. He made Cooper Kupp the Offensive Player of the Year and a league MVP candidate after he hadn't made a Pro Bowl in his first 4 years. But he wasn't enough firepower for the Rams. Similar to the Bucs signing Antonio Brown, the Rams signed Odell Beckham Jr. to a 1-year deal in November of that year. He had just been floating out in free agency after being cut by the Browns due to causing drama in the locker room. He immediately lifted the offense even more and caught 5 touchdowns in the second half of the year. Stafford threw for 41 touchdowns, the most in his career, and the Rams finished the regular season with a 12-5 record. They made it all the way to the Super Bowl and fended off the Joe Burrow-led Bengals to finally get McVay and Stafford's first ring. Since then, the Rams have continued this method, trading away draft picks for proven players. We'll see if it can result in more than one Super Bowl, which is how many Aaron Rodgers currently has to this point in his career. His time in Green Bay was drama-filled at the beginning and at the end, but I think most fans will remember him for the middle, which includes a Super Bowl victory and 2 league MVPs. The franchise has been spoiled, having 3 Hall of Fame quarterbacks, 2 of them back-to-back spanning the better part of 30 years. The Packers are one of the league's most respected franchises and have always figured out how to win, even when talent doesn't seem to be on par with the rest of the league. The one constant was an elite quarterback, which goes to show just how important they are. The last year or so for Rodgers was tumultuous, though, as the argument could be made that outside of Jordy Nelson for a time and Devontae Adams, Green Bay had failed to provide Rodgers with consistent weapons on offense. After trading away Adams to the Raiders last offseason, Rodgers was left with a decision to make. Try to force himself into a trade, retire to go host Jeopardy, or come back to the Packers and run it back. He went for the last option, and although the season started quite rough, they were in playoff contention in the final week of the season. Things just didn't go their way, so 1 year after the decision to come back, he had the same question to ponder. This time, he took a darkness retreat to see more clearly, and when he came out and saw his shadow, he knew there would be no more seasons in Wisconsin. All along, it was understood that if a trade were to happen, it would be to the New York Jets. They had the draft capital and the roster set up to be successful with an elite quarterback, because not only would the Packers need to agree to a deal, but Aaron would need to agree to the destination. Not because of a no-trade clause, but because he would just have to rework his deal wherever he went to be able to afford the cap hit. The Jets last season under first-year head coach Robert Saleh had pretty good success considering they trotted out the likes of Zach Wilson, Mike White, and a 38-year-old Joe Flacco. They just couldn't sustain it towards the end due to injuries. They had a top 5 defense in every category, but were near the bottom of the league in scoring. Rookie wide receiver Garrett Wilson showed flashes of being a superstar, so you knew with a good quarterback, he'd be even greater. Then, before any trade was agreed to, the Jets went out and signed Rodgers' favorite Green Bay target from last year in Alan Lazard. Then, they hired Nathaniel Hackett, who used to be Rodgers' QB coach in Green Bay, as their offensive coordinator. The stage was set, and they were rolling out the red carpet for Rodgers. Finally, the week of the draft, they agreed to terms with the Packers, swapping first-round picks this year, adding a second-round and a sixth-round pick, as well as a conditional second-round pick next year that will become a first as long as Rodgers plays 65% of the offensive snaps. Will Rodgers be able to repeat the immediate success of the predecessor mercenaries? The Jets are betting on it.